going to the next slide, we explain how at a subwatershed level we could have the focus from the post-development hydrology. You might not be able to see the graphic very well, but the idea is to make those numbers for runoff, evapotranspiration, as well as what goes inside the ground, infiltration, match what used to be in a natural water cycle. Mm-hmm. So if in a very simple, basic word, if you go to the next slide, you look at restoring urban hydrology, basically making a city fabric, like you see on the left side, function more like a natural sort of forested landscape.
That's a big goal.
Oh yeah. And this is sort of a very simple way sort of to express how the hydrology would work. But looking at the next slide, we look at the urban watershed in the urban bird's eye for the lower Charles. And the idea is to make it function like a natural watershed, which is what your next slide would be looking like. Mm-hmm. So you're essentially taking the urban hardscape and turning it from a functional standpoint into a naturalistic landscape. A lot of this work that we did in the past, I should mention, this was funded by the Boston Foundation and the Cabot Family Charitable Trust. We looked at 3 different case study areas in the Charles Lower Watershed, and we came up with the Blue Cities Guide, which is essentially a document that takes you through the entire process that was followed in the 3 case study areas, and we come up with sort of a checklist of things that should be kept as a part of the process.
And how could people get that guide? Can they get it from the CRWA?
Yes, it's available on our website. We also have hard copies that we can share with folks who are interested. So yes, it's definitely something you can check out today itself. If you go to our website under projects, you will get to this guide. And I can if you contact me, my information is with Renata. I can also share the hard copies with you. Mm-hmm. The idea of looking at the public realm approaches, you look at various options like street greening, introducing greenways, not only to access the river from your urban watersheds, but also being able to use that as an opportunity to retrofit sort of hardscape areas with trees, street trees, rain gardens, planters, something that not only helps with restoring the water cycle, but also makes for a better pedestrian environment. Yeah. So we've really looked at what the different options are in terms of putting in green infrastructure within urban watersheds.
Good. Now I know I'm going to push you a little bit to go faster because we want to make sure you can cover everything here.
Yeah, the next slide looks at private scale opportunity, and you could have anything from small rain gardens to retrofitting large parking lots with green infrastructure. Similarly, going to the next slide, for building with stormwater, we look at either rain barrels, something that homeowners can install in their own homes, or even bigger strategies like having constructed wetlands where you have more area available.
Like the new boathouse on the Charles River has some of that, yes.
Exactly. So looking at the initiatives on a building scale, which is the next slide, you could incorporate, again, interventions for the hardscapes outside your buildings as something that you could work in your green building technology as you are thinking about constructing or retrofitting existing buildings.
So there are no standards yet, like your LEED standards. So that's something that would be the next step to incorporate that.
They are looking at LEED standards for neighborhood development. So we have sent in comments on the water aspect and how those standards could be adopted with LEED for neighborhood development. So hopefully a lot of this will actually get incorporated in that. But right now there aren't any. That's true. In terms of benefits for the green infrastructure, we are looking at not only resolving issues with flooding and groundwater that I mentioned before, but also looking at how public realm can be enhanced and made more pedestrian friendly, looking at how we can gather public support not just for stormwater remediation, but also making healthier neighborhoods which are greener. And we've had a lot of community support in all our case study areas, North Allston, Brighton, Longwood Medical Area, etc. So we're really hopeful in terms of getting a lot of these ideas in the ground constructed.
Because often water, as it disappears, it becomes very invisible.
Exactly.
But this green infrastructure will be enjoyable and visible to everybody.
Absolutely. And we've done a lot of work since with communities to make them aware of all these concepts and how to push for them. The next slide looks at the specific example of North Allston, which is one of our case studies for our Blue Cities initiative. And we looked at essentially the area that Harvard University was expanding into, and the idea was to make that redevelopment be an opportunity for restoration. So looking at the next slide, where we looked at the historic stream and hydrology of the area, we actually found a stream that was kept into a stormwater pipe, and the idea was to have approaches that would daylight that stream. And we've worked with Harvard back and forth for the last 3 years to looking at what kinds of strategies could be put in place so that at least some sections of the stream could be daylighted, which would not only improve the water quality, but also make it a huge amenity for the neighborhood.
And daylight means that it's visible again.
Exactly.
It's not in a drainage.
Exactly. It's not buried and invisible, but something that the community can actually enjoy. Going to the next slide, which looks at the restoration concept, we essentially came up with a greenway which would connect the neighborhood from sort of within the subwatershed to the river across the Harvard campus. And we looked at water as the guiding principle for organizing how you would develop streets, put in building blocks, etc. And the idea was to have different strategies like street greening. If you look at the next slide for Coolidge Road, we looked at how existing conditions on Coolidge Road can be improved by putting in green street elements. So going to the next slide, we look at putting in permeable pavement and grass swales. This is how it exists right now, but with the retrofit opportunities, you could have improvements with the next slide, looking at how those kinds of retrofits can actually be implemented. Again, looking at Travis Street, which is another industrial street, or street with industrial uses on either side, how that could be improved with retrofits like street trees, rain gardens, etc. Going to the next slide, we can show that as a possible public realm enhancement. Again, looking at the campus itself for Harvard, this is an area next to the Harvard Business School, and our idea was to have a wetland be a part of the landscape here, not only to treat water in terms of water quality benefits, but also slow down the runoff and have address the erosion problem that we see on the river bank. So the idea was to have a wetland system that would connect back to the neighborhood. If you look at the next slide here, you could see how certain landscape strategies could be incorporated within this area.